The following program is a presentation of the Civil War Broadcasting Network, available on the free YouTube channel General Grant by Himself or Dr. E.C. Fields, on the Facebook page Kurt Fields as General Ulysses S. Grant, and on various other social media. The website is generalgrantbyhimself.com. This program is one of those presentations in the ongoing series General Grant Looks at the American Civil War, wherein General Grant looks at a person, place, or event in the Civil War for reflection and observation. Permission to copy and distribute is given and indeed encouraged. Remember, you are the future of our past. And now General Grant looks back at after Vicksburg. We thought he was dead. I'm Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, and welcome to the library tonight. Tonight I would like to look back at what happened at the surrender and afterwards at Vicksburg, the events that took place over the next couple of months. Now, as soon as Vicksburg surrendered, we realized that we'd taken about 31,000 prisoners, 60,000 stand of arms, and 260 cannon. Well, with the arms, it was brought to my attention that many, if not most, of the Confederate muskets were imported through the blockade runners and were the later and much better model than what we had of the British Enfield. A number of my troops were actually still using converted flintlocks. I think they were referred to as Class A muskets. But I was asked if we could swap, and I gave the approval. So a lot of the arms that were turned in as captured Confederate were really our arms that we had turned in and swapped for better ones that the Confederates had. I knew I had to do three things immediately upon Pemberton's surrender on the 4th of July. One was to send troops, Sherman, to go to our rear, that 50 miles or so toward Jackson, Mississippi, and clear out Joe Johnston. So we had the rebels out of that area to our rear. And we spent the next several weeks clearing out within 100 miles all the rebel activity. What resulted was guerrilla activity, harassing, burning bridges, and attacking trains and so forth. Never could quite stop all of that. The second thing I had to do was to send a force to General Banks about 100 miles downriver to Port Hudson and help him take Port Hudson, which had been under siege for about a month. And actually a fellow that was in my graduating class at West Point, Frank Gardner, had gone south, and Frank was in command of Port Hudson. And the third thing I had to do was obviously notify the War Department and the president that Vicksburg had fallen. I wanted and advocated immediately that I wanted to move on Mobile, Alabama, and close the last port on the Gulf of Mexico that the rebels had. And General Nathaniel Banks agreed with me in this. We put the proposal to General Halleck, and he turned it down. Now, he didn't give us a reason. He didn't feel he had a need to give us a reason for the turning down, but he indicated that he wanted us to establish a presence in Texas on the Mexican border. Now, while I thought all that was necessary would be a brigade or perhaps a division at Brownsville, Texas, apparently General Halleck felt that nothing in the western theater, east side of the Mississippi River, was as important as what was across the Mississippi in the trans-Mississippi area. which was frustrating to me, particularly since I had the concurrence of General Banks. But more about that a bit later when I tell you about President Lincoln's involvement. But Sherman moved out, he moved east, he swept Johnson back toward Jackson, and Johnston pulled out. And on July the 17th, Sherman had once again secured Jackson, and that problem was over. Now I've got upwards of between 70 and 80,000 troops, and I'm wanting, as I had said, to go to Mobile. I advocated again on, I think, July the 18th, the second time, and then again in August, let us go to Mobile. And the reason I wanted to go to Mobile was that Bragg was up in North Georgia, Middle Tennessee, South Middle Tennessee, and if we went to Mobile, not only would we close a significant blockade runner port for us and take it from the rebels, but Bragg would have to come back and give me battle. He'd have to come back south and give me battle. Or if he chose not to, that was quite all right with me, because I would have begun wreaking havoc in the plains of central Mississippi and through Alabama, and eliminated a significant food source for both Banks, for both Bragg and General Lee, because the Army of Northern Virginia and Bragg's Army of Mississippi were both taking a great deal of food out of central Mississippi and through central Alabama. So either we move on Mobile and either Bragg ignores us and we wreak havoc there south of him between Mobile and Tennessee, or it takes the pressure off of the potential invasion of going back into Kentucky and possibly Ohio, because Bragg would come back down and give me battle. I thought it would be a sound plan, and so did General Banks. But that was not to be. And as I said, more about that in a moment. Immediately after the surrender, President Lincoln sent a telegram to me that I should like to share with you. I think it to be unique in history between a general-in-chief and a subordinate general. July 13th, 1863, to Major General Grant. My dear General, I do not remember that you and I have met personally. I write this now as a grateful acknowledgement for the almost inestimable service you have done the country. I wish to say further, when you first reached the vicinity of Vicksburg, I thought you should do what you finally did, march the troops across the neck, run the batteries with the transports, and thus go below. And I never had any faith except a general hope that you knew better than I, that the Yazoo Pass expedition and the like could succeed. When you got below and took Port Gibson, Grand Gulf, and vicinity, I thought you should go down the river and join General Banks. And when you turned northward, east of the Big Black, I feared it was a mistake. I now wish to make a personal acknowledgement that you were right and I was wrong. Yours very truly, A. Lincoln. I've kept this letter. I believe it to be the only example of a general-in-chief acknowledging to a subordinate general that he was right and he was wrong and the general was right. You see, the initial plan was for me to cross the Mississippi and go south from Bruinsburg or wherever I could land, join with Nathaniel Banks, capture Port Hudson, and then move north and joined Banks's Army of the Gulf and my Army of the Tennessee together would move on Vicksburg. But when I got across the river on May the 1st, I think it was on the 3rd, that I sent a message to General Banks to send me 10,000 men. He was over in Arkansas, Louisiana with the Red River efforts that he was making, and he said it would be at least 2 weeks before he could get 10,000 men to me. And actually, in later messages, he said it would be later than that. It could be probably or possibly the 1st of June or into July. Well, I decided not to wait on him and move north on my own because I felt that 2 weeks the rebels could have 50,000 men there waiting on us, and the 10,000 would be of no use. Moreover, as the 10,000 came toward the river to go to Port Hudson and join with me, then a lot of troops would be siphoned off for guard duty and guarding supply lines and so forth. So I thought that I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go north and gamble on taking Vicksburg on my own. Now, a couple of things about that I should share. First of all, if I had linked with Banks, he outranked me. And if we had linked, taken Port Hudson and moved on to Vicksburg, then it would have been Banks' victory and not mine. I knew that it was going to take 6 or 8 days to get a message from Bruinsburg by steamer upriver to Cairo, Illinois, then telegraph it to Halleck. When Halleck makes his reply, you have to reverse that process back to Cairo with the telegram, back down to Port Hudson with the orders, and then find me wherever I might be in the interior of Mississippi. So I knew I had 15, 16 days where I could move with no communication from General Halleck. He couldn't tell me, no, don't do that, which in fact is what he did, because on May the 17th, 14 days later, when I'm standing there with Sherman overlooking our taking of the Big Black River and pushing Pemberton across into Vicksburg to begin the siege, a colonel rode up to me with the orders from General Halleck that I was to return to Bruinsburg and go south, link up with Nathaniel Banks, and we'd take Port Hudson. About the time he gave me that order, General Lawler with his brigade had broken loose from near the river and were in a mad rush charge, pushing the last of Pemberton's men across the river. I told the colonel, this is not valid any longer. If General Halleck knew the situation as I'm watching Pemberton fall back across the Big Black River, he would not give that order. Now, the colonel insisted that I follow the order, but when I saw Lawler leading his men in a charge, I just mounted my horse and rode away. And I haven't heard from that officer. He was sputtering and objecting as I rode away with Sherman with me. I haven't heard from him even unto this day. So I gambled that I wouldn't get the orders not to go north and take Vicksburg on my own. And I was successful. It took about the length of time I thought it would to get that message. Well, after Pemberton surrendered, there was some good news. I was made a major general of the regular army, and I wrote Julia a letter that said our future is now secured, because now I was making more money as a regular officer, not a general of volunteers. I'd been a major general of volunteers. My uniform remained the same with the 2 stars on the shoulder straps, but now I was making more money and I had a pension, and when the war was over, I would retain the rank of major general in the regular army. So it was a great day for me. I was absolutely enthralled with that news. But I tried to be generous. I recommended that Sherman and McPherson to be promoted to brigadier general in the regular army, and they were quickly done so. And I also recommended 7 other colonels serving with me in the campaign to be promoted to brigadier general, brevet brigadier general of volunteers. So 7 colonels got to be brigadier general of volunteers. Sherman and McPherson got to be brigadier general regular army, and I became major general in the regular army. Now, as I said, I wanted to go to Mobile, but Halleck said no, and I thought unilaterally said no, with the emphasis on the Trans-Mississippi, as I said. I was very frustrated. As I said earlier, made the other two appeals to go to Mobile, and was told no both times. Asked to go to New Orleans, was told no. Then I had the same thing done to me after Vicksburg that had been done after Shiloh and Corinth. My army began to be parsed out. I was ordered to send 4,000 men to Banks in New Orleans. I then sent the 9th Corps back to Kentucky to Burnside, who was waiting for them. See, all these men that I had borrowed, so to speak, for the siege at Vicksburg have now got to be returned. I couldn't take them all in a juggernaut and go toward Mobile. Then I sent 5,000 men to John Schofield up in Missouri, which was good. He's going after Sterling Price in Missouri, but I wanted those men. And I sent the 13th Corps then, with Ord now in command. I had relieved McClernand, but Ord in the 13th Corps is sent to New Orleans. I sent a brigade with General Ransom, down to Natchez, Mississippi. But that was fortuitous, because when he got there, the rebels had brought a herd of cattle, some 5,000 cattle, and they got there the same time Ransom did. So we were able to get 5,000 head of cattle that, instead of going to a hungry Confederate army, they went to my army. So a stroke of luck there. Well, when I was ordered to send the 13th Corps down to New Orleans, I then decided it's time for me to go to New Orleans, because now, since I'm sending men, I don't have to ask permission. I've got business there, even though I'd been denied permission to go to New Orleans a month or so earlier. And I arrived there on September the 2nd of 63, and I took note that it was the first time I'd been in New Orleans in 18 years, since I'd come through there en route to the war in Mexico. General Nathaniel Banks was in command, the Army of the Gulf. He's in that area, and he welcomed me and feted me at a banquet at the St. Charles Hotel, very lavish banquet that night. And we talked a good bit, visited and discussed on the next day, on the 3rd of September. But on the 4th of September, I was invited out to do a review of the troops, 13th and I think the 19th Corps, at Carrollton, Louisiana. And the day before, on the 3rd, General Banks and I had a carriage race, and I won. The orderly that took the horses when we got them back to the stables remarked that both of the horses pulling my carriage were steaming as if they were locomotives, steam coming off their bodies. Now, Nathaniel Banks, he's former governor of Massachusetts. In fact, he'd been the Speaker of the House of Representatives, political appointee general. Very proud of his horses, very proud of his horsemanship. Likes to test generals. Admiral Farragut had some difficulty with riding a horse, much to the discreet pleasure of General Banks. Well, when we decided to go do the review, General Banks chose a horse for me, Charlie. Charlie was a big, dark horse, stamping hooves, snorting nostrils, flared nostrils. And as I understand now, some of the officers queried General Banks about, do you really want Grant to ride this? And General Banks is reported to have said, let Grant ride him. So I got him. I was excited with the way he was acting. It took 2 orderlies to hold him so I could get on him, mount him. And I later described him as ill-tempered and not well used. General, his name escapes me, said, one of the other generals there said that he was a hard-mouthed brute and hard to control. So we went out and reviewed the troops at Carrollton, Louisiana. And on the way back, as I recall, we were riding alongside a railroad track. And I'm told, because I do not remember, the engineer recognized me and laid down on that whistle when he was right beside me. Charlie lost his mind. Now, several different stories have come to my attention. They all came together, and I'm told all these things happened. First of all, that Charlie reared, spun on his side, and ran directly into a carriage that was coming along at about that time and fell over on his left side. That he had reared over and went back too far and fell back on his left side with me under him. That he hit the carriage, got tangled up with the horses in the carriage, and fell down on his left side. Whatever happened, because I was knocked unconscious, I'm proud to say I was not thrown. Charlie hit the ground, was stunned. I was firmly in that saddle. Charlie got up on his own. I laid there. And one of the officers on the scene said, and I think a letter to his wife later, in looking at me lying on the ground unconscious, we thought he was dead. Well, the surgeon scooped me up, took me back to the St. Charles Hotel, and I woke up several days later. It turns out that they suspected that I had dislocated my left hip and I had a skull fracture. I was unconscious for several days. When I finally regained consciousness, my entire left side was swollen even up under my armpits, and I couldn't turn myself over, not for any activity. I had to be rolled over, and I remained that way for another 4 or 5 days. It was on September the 16th that I got back to Vicksburg. But while I was there at the St. Charles Hotel, I was able to do a little relaxing once some of the pain had subsided, and I read Phoenixiana, the latest comedy book out by a friend of mine that I'd graduated with at the academy. Enjoyed myself a bit, but after about 10 days, I knew I had to get back to Vicksburg. General Sherman had been working in the office while I was gone, but he refused to take command. He refused to send out any orders under his name. He said, I'll just issue the orders that are necessary under your name and keep the office work going until you get back. Well, I was carried. They brought my boat to the nearest dock, and they put me in a sling, which was agony, and carried me to the boat. And we sailed back up to Vicksburg. I got there, as I said, on September the 16th. I'd been injured on September the 4th. And for another week or so, I was abed. Now, Julia and the children came down to join me then, and I established my headquarters in the Lum, L-U-M, the Lum house there near the river. A 26-room mansion, very commodious for myself, my staff working, and for Julia and the children. So that's where I was when I got word in October to report to Cairo, Illinois, to meet a representative of the War Department. Now, I must needs backtrack a bit. In the weeks following the surrender at Vicksburg, General Halleck gave General Sherman and myself a question about what to do with civil government in the occupied South. I want your answers, and I may well give them to the president. So Sherman replied, I would not coax them or even meet them halfway, but make them so sick of war that generations would pass before they would again appeal to it. Now, I wrote, the people of these states are beginning to see how much they need the protection of federal laws and institutions. They have experienced the misfortune of being without them and are now in a most happy condition to appreciate the blessings. I think we should do it with terms held out that be accepting they could receive the protection of our laws. So I took a more conciliatory approach, but I thought we need to be about healing and make these people our countrymen once again in feeling as well as in fact. Another item that I need to go back and look at that was going on at this time, my 3 appeals to go to Mobile and why I was turned down. And then Banks and I asked, and we were both turned down. We knew something had to be done in Texas. That was what Halleck was telling us. But President Lincoln was the inspiration, the driving force behind the refusal to go to Mobile, because he didn't think that Banks and I were strong enough to divide our forces and go to Mobile and take it, hold it, and go across the river and go into the Texas on the Texas-Mexican border and stave off the French, because they were a problem. I got my first lesson in international diplomacy, and I had expressed some dissatisfaction about not going to Mobile, and the president sent me a telegram and said, I see by a dispatch of yours that you incline strongly toward an expedition against Mobile. This would appear tempting to me also, were it not that, in view of recent events in Mexico, I am greatly impressed with the importance of reestablishing the national authority in western Texas as soon as possible. Now, this requires that I go into a broader picture. Now, in May of 1861, spring of 61, Benito Juarez was elected the president of Mexico. Popular election. Now, almost as soon as he took office, he declared a 2-year moratorium on paying Mexico's national debts, and that involved Great Britain, Spain, and France, which is now under the leadership of Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III. Well, when Juarez says 2 years and we're not going to pay anything, immediately England, Spain, and France sent 10,000 troops to Mexico in a joint expedition. They meant to show we mean business. Now, once they got there, Juarez, who was well-meaning, worked with them, and there was some settlement between England and Spain, and they were satisfied, at least for the moment, and they withdrew their troops. But now you've got Napoleon III, who thinks he's another Napoleon, who's wanting to reestablish France as a world power, going through Mexico and entering the war on the side of the Confederacy. And he'd been advocating for 2 years for other European countries to come into the war and support the Confederacy. Well, he sent 35,000 troops to Mexico. And from Veracruz to Mexico City, they followed the same march that I did with General Scott earlier in the Mexican War, from Veracruz to Mexico City, and they took Mexico City. Now, this is about the time that this is the end of June, that Lee is marching into Pennsylvania. Mexico City falls to Napoleon III, he installs Maximilian of Austria as a puppet emperor and is menacing coming into the war on the side of the Confederacy. That's why President Lincoln was so anxious to put troops in the Trans-Mississippi. I did not know this. I thought it was the idea of General Halleck, who just didn't want us to go to Mobile, and it was more important across the river than what was happening on the east side of the river. That was not the case. General Halleck indicated to me about this time that there's much going on that I can't talk about, but we need to have a military presence as strong as possible, as soon as possible in Texas. And this is paralleling our own efforts. Benito Juarez is elected when the war starts. Mexico declares they're not going to pay their debts about the time of Bull Run. The time Lee is moving into Pennsylvania, Mexico City falls to the French influence and bristling about coming into the war. And as I said, Lincoln felt that Banks and I were too weak to take a two-pronged approach and do both tasks. He was worried about the Monroe Doctrine violation, to be sure, but he thought one war at a time. And that's why we were not allowed to go to Mobile and take Mobile. So that is where I should bring my comments to a close. After the Vicksburg fell, what I wanted to do was denied, but I found out later with good reason, although I do think we could have done both. Taking Mobile, I think, would probably have shortened the war, certainly months, perhaps years, and saved lives. But that's conjecture. And as I've said before, conjecture is a parlor game played by adults who have no stake whatever in that which they are discussing. I got my lesson in international diplomacy, and the president actually sent me a letter telling me, I understand you want to do this, I would too, but circumstances do not allow it. When I went into a defensive mode. My army is being sent away from me in big fragments and pieces, and I became actually concerned about being able to defend myself against the rebels that were in Mississippi in the area. I sent most of it off to hither and yon all over the war. So I was greatly disturbed about that. Went to New Orleans, rode Charlie, got hurt, laid up, broken or dislocated hip, skull fracture probably, seriously injured, laid up, severely limited in my working ability for nearly 2 months. It was not a good time for me physically, even though we had been triumphant with Vicksburg. So, as the officer said, I was told later, seeing me lying on the road, although I was so proud that I'd not been thrown, although actually my doctor says it would have been better for me if I had been thrown instead of the horse falling so heavily on me. That officer said, we thought he was dead. But I wasn't. I survived to live and fight another day. And with those comments, I will bring my reflections to a close. I thank you for joining me here in my library and hearing me review with you what happened at the surrender of Vicksburg and after it, my almost being killed in New Orleans. So, until we meet again, I bid you a very fond adieu.